This is the Writers Are People Too podcast, where I can't get writers to stop talking about themselves. Tonight we have with us second-time guest Zac Cannon. So for everyone that missed you last time, Zac, go ahead and give me a little bit of information about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Zac. I've been writing for a couple years now. Glad to be back on the podcast. Started writing again during the pandemic and trying not to stop anytime soon, hopefully. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. And, I think last time you alluded to some other creative works you've done, including screenwriting and stuff. Tell me a little bit about your creative past and what's brought you to being an author today.
Certainly. So I attended film school. That was my kind of first undergraduate study. I moved out to California when I was 21. Went to a school out there that I won't name because they went under for financial reasons. But it was a great
Brooks?
time. Was it what?
Brooks Institute of Photography?
It was Brooks, yes.
Okay. I'm from Santa Barbara originally, so. All right, am I back now? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah, for sure.
Okay, awesome. Side note, I'm living in North Carolina right now,
Okay.
and so we had our internet go out with all the hurricanes and stuff. So now I'm on Starlink, and so Starlink is pretty good most of the time, but sometimes when it goes between the satellites, I think I lose connection. So I think that might have just been what happened.
I'll be patient. It's fine.
Thank you. Well, now I'm back on my other internet, so hopefully we're going to be okay moving forward. There's always technical difficulties on this podcast. I don't know what it is, but nonetheless, you were telling me you went to Brooks, and I was saying I know of Brooks because I'm originally from Santa Barbara. So
gotcha.
There we go.
So I lived in Ojai for about 11 years, and did the whole Brooks experience. Again, my time there was great. The closure was after my time, so I have no real comments on that, except that I didn't get any money or anything out of that whole deal. But as far as the experience, it was wonderful. Made shorts and worked on other people's projects and some other bigger films and music videos and stuff like that. But I really just gravitated towards screenwriting. And I think that was what I kind of entered the school wanting to do. And then as I learned how to make films, that was what I found I was more comfortable with. I liked directing. I'm not a good cinematographer. I found that out really quickly. I don't like math, but I enjoyed the process, and I took a lot of that with me moving forward. But filmmaking is a really collaborative effort. It's a team sport, and after film school, I kind of started going down other tracks with my life and starting a family, and kept holding on to those aspirations to maybe make films. But the further I got away from film school, the further I got away from the people that I kind of needed the connection to do that in a way that would be beneficial. And then, just found myself doing other outlets for my creativity. Never really stopped writing. Writing has always kind of just been a part of my ritual. Friday or Saturday night, even when my kids were little, and it was hard to get them to go to bed, I tried to put in some time. And then in 2020, when we were all kind of waylaid and I was doing a little bit existential soul searching, I just decided, I have this thing that I like doing and I have some time, so why not do it? And I wrote a screenplay called Sunflower. And so that was pretty much my pandemic project. And then 2021, I began to kind of fish that out to some festivals and competitions and got some traction there, got some placement and a few finalist positions in a few places. And then that all went away. And I was left with a screenplay that I had one conversation with a producer in Texas about and then never heard from anybody else. And I thought, well, I'll just publish it. I'll just put it as a novella. Kindle is great for self-publishing, and tried not to tidy it up too much. So it reads a lot more like a screenplay as far as like the way the grammar and the structure and the pacing is. Not a lot of internalization. I added some here and there, but really I wanted to kind of give it as natural a translation as I could from screenplay to novella. And I really enjoyed that. And when that was done, I thought, well, what's next? And so I have a few other projects in between, some short stories and stuff like that. But Slantwise has been my main project for probably the last year and a half.
Awesome. Yeah, we're definitely going to get to Slantwise. Um, going back to Sunflower for a second, though, did you win some awards for that, or what happened with that?
I placed, I don't have a copy of it around. I placed in a few, so now I live in Central Virginia. So Richmond has a film festival, Nashville has a film festival, Atlanta has a really nice film festival, and then there's an international film festival and screenplay competition. And so I was a finalist in 2 or 3 of those, and I didn't win any of them, but I ranked very high in all of them and got to kind of go. Unfortunately, that was also during a time when a lot of those celebrations were online due to the pandemic and stuff like that. So
What do you think led to you ranking high? Was it a great story? Was it great writing? Just go ahead and praise yourself here for a moment while you tell us why it's so good.
yeah, I mean, I think my strengths as a storyteller are are plotting just for the sake of the story, but for the emotional curvature of the story. Um, and trying to keep that in mind with Sunflower, and then learning from that as a writer was, okay, well, this isn't necessarily about just how the characters are going to experience this, but how an audience is going to experience that. And I think that was the big pivot, was whether somebody's watching this as a screenplay turned into a film, or someone's reading this as a book or a novel or whatever, however they're consuming this story, I need to take into consider what emotional journey I'm going to take them on, and how does then plotting play a role in that. And that's basic stuff, but I'm a very slow learner. And so it took me a little while to put all those things together. It's one thing to play around and have a lot of fun with a stack of index cards and try to come up with the most interesting story, or a twist or an idea in a genre that you really like. It's another thing to actually think, well, how are people going to receive this? And I think there, from both the people that I talked to about the screenplay version of it and the people that read the novella, even as recently as like this past summer, a friend of mine who had no interest in my writing, because one of those things where you're like, I wrote a book, and your friend's like, oh, okay, and you're like, oh, you should check it out. I was like, I'll get around to it. He read it
Yeah,
on
I
his
hear that all the time.
vacation, and he was kind of surprised by like the fact that it was a decent story and it actually moved him. So I think that was what it was trying to pay attention to how this is going to impact these people. And I just thought, even though it's kind of a high concept story, the characters and their journey was relatable enough that anyone could experience it. So.
Awesome. I have to get selfish here for a moment. Did you actually end up watching the film that I put out?
I did, yeah.
Awesome. I love to hear that. Hey, even if you made it through the whole thing, that's a win for me.
Yeah, for sure. I watched all of it.
We didn't win any awards for that, and I was a little bit disappointed for that. But I'm curious, as someone who's been through film school and done your own projects and stuff, what could I have done better as a director and writer?
Well,
Put aside the cinematography and sound, which you said are great.
And I'm by no means a professional. But I'll tell you what I appreciated, and I mentioned a few of these via message to you earlier. I appreciated the color correction, the attempt to make each scene uniform. More than anything, I appreciated sound. One of the things that stuck with me all these years is, you can have a film that looks like crap, but if it sounds good, you can watch it as long as the story is compelling. If it doesn't sound good, then you've lost everybody. And so I think that your art direction for your budget, the way that you used sound, and the way that you used your color and your lighting, I thought your casting was really good. I particularly really liked the fireside scene and all of that dialogue, and I wasn't really sure where this was going to go, but I just appreciated how that was set in motion. And then you have a significant portion of your film where there's no dialogue. It's just action and kind of this internal debate than an external kind of version of that
Yeah.
consequence. So all in all, structurally and all that stuff, I thought it was a really great little short film. The only other thing was like, yeah, you know what? If you had a bunch more money and probably a lot more
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
then there you go. But aside from those things, I think with your budget and your casting and your resources, you made the best film that you could probably make. So
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, we shot the film. The budget was $1,000, and that includes all the food for the cast and all the submissions to the film fest and all this stuff. All the actors were basically first time actors. I was a first time writer director. The cinematographer, he has his own YouTube channel, so he's pretty experienced, which is probably why you like the cinematography and sound. He has some experience with that.
well,
But
I mean, it helps.
yeah, no,
It
I
definitely helps.
appreciate that.
I was going to ask where you guys shot at because it says in the mountains, and I'm
Yeah, we shot just across the North Carolina Tennessee border in Tennessee.
okay. Yeah. So keep going. I mean, learn from what you did and keep making it stuff. Like that's the best part of it, right? Like
Awesome.
whatever we're doing, we can continue to figure out, well, I like that and I'm going to I learned something about the way I do things. I think that's the most important part. And then I learned that I need to grow in these areas, but my voice is stronger here or there. So
Going back to something you said a few minutes ago, do you think it's more difficult to be a creative when you're collaborating and creating film versus being a solitary writer?
no, I think I yearned for collaboration a lot during this project. My poor spouse. And there's scenes in the book where I'd call somebody up and ask them a question or ask them about an idea for a location. And so I think collaboration is great. I think I missed just having some people that I could sit around a table and we could all just kind of talk about a scene or about what we were working on. And I wonder how much of the blockage of trying to work through this first time novel on my own could have been better with more input. But at the same time, it forced me to do a lot of internal work. This is not a biographical book by any stretch of the imagination, but it does pull from some pretty deeply rooted emotional memory. And so I venture to guess that part would have been stunted. So there's probably pros and cons to both. But I ended up being my own collaborator. I would just take these long walks and send myself really long voice memos, and then later I would have conversations with my past self about the things that I said myself. So it worked out, but different things.
So you're like turning a stream of consciousness into more organized words on the page is what's going on, kind of?
Yeah. Most of the time I would get stuck, which the second half of the book I got stuck a lot. I would just go on walks and then I would just send myself voice memos and text memos, and then I would parse those out later and try to figure out what was this morning's Zac thinking when he sent X, Y, and Z, and then figuring out, and it worked oftentimes. And then just learning to trust myself through the process as well. But yeah, it would have been fun to have a few more people to bounce a few more ideas off of, for sure.
Well, you can always shoot me a project you're working on and bounce some ideas off me. I'm happy to do that.
Sure thing.
So I watched your book trailer for Slantwise, kind of tying together your past of filmmaking and now authoring. Did you design this trailer, or did you get someone else to do that?
No, I put that together. Speaking of budget, that I had about $20 and some stock footage and about 2 hours, and that's what came out. So yeah,
awesome.
I liked the little trailer. It was fun.
Yeah, it was. So up front, I've only finished half your book, so please no spoilers. I'm going to finish it as soon as we're off of this. So I do know about half of what's going on, and I feel like the trailer did very well encapsulate the feeling of this town and the actions therein that you're describing. But last time you came on, And again, it was for Augmented Volume 1, which was a sci-fi anthology, but this is not, Slantwise is not sci-fi. I mean, unless the second half is completely different,
There's
no spoilers, please.
that's not a spoiler. There's no significant genre twist.
Okay. So, genre is actually an interesting question to have. So it starts off reading like I would consider like a literary fiction, but then it very quickly morphs into like a hard-boiled detective novel almost. So what genre were you aiming for when you were writing this?
Yeah, that's exactly what my thought was I wanted, again, bringing it back to film, my thought was if early David Gordon Green, like All the Real Girls and George Washington and Snow Angels, directed like an Elmore Leonard novel, that's what my goal was. So have these moments of kind of slow burn, meditative, kind of internalized moments, and then slowly morph that into. So I mean, it doesn't switch genres, but it definitely the further Holt goes into the story, the faster the world of the story catches up to him. So we have less moments to be as reflective. But I think there are still those moments. They're just more they're punctuated more by the things that are happening in the story. But yeah, it definitely kind of starts off a little bit slower on purpose, so that we can get a taste for who he is and what his current world is like, and how he has hopefully set it up to not be what it kind of turns into.
Yeah, we're going to get into your descriptions in a second here because they were excellent. All your character descriptions. Now that you're saying it, it's much slower. Now that you're saying that it's much slower at the beginning, I did realize there were more descriptions like the ones that I loved you were doing at the beginning, and then as you mentioned, I can see they kind of were pushed aside for more action and plot. So okay, I get that. So putting aside the genre of Slantwise for a moment, what's your true genre of choice that you enjoy writing in, and why is that?
I mean, I would say the most content that I've put out has been I would more associated with science fiction. But the science fiction that I like, because I'm lazy, is the science fiction that kind of has a human element with something that's happening in the background that's not necessarily the thing. It's propelling the story, but it's not necessarily what the key thing is. So so my augmented story, the moon was gonna, a comet was gonna strike the moon, but that wasn't the point of the story. And I'll have I'm working on a short story collection that is almost entirely science fiction. That'll hopefully be out sometime next year. But I think I gravitate towards that for the same reason some people gravitate towards horror, or other genres, is I can find ways to talk about things through science fiction that I can't talk about through other genres.
Yeah.
And partially part of this genre was also, we can get into that later, but it was partially like I wanted to tell a story about a person, and what genre fit them best was this genre.
Yeah. Real quick before we get into the characterization. So you're from Virginia. You've explicitly said that Slantwise takes place in Appalachia. And I tried to stalk the number of the Moose Lodge that you gave, but it wasn't giving me one in Appalachia. So I don't know exactly. Do you know exactly where this is?
It's a made up county. And I go out of my way to not say Virginia in the book, although I probably should have on hindsight. So if anybody watches this, it's pretty much Virginia, but it is a made up county. But I grew up in southwestern Virginia, and it's kind of a take several counties in several areas and smush them together into this fictitious version of this place that I grew up.
Mm-hmm. And then for the plot and characters themselves, you had mentioned a couple minutes ago about, I forget the exact terms you used, but you said looking for characters in your past or something like that. Is this based at all on true events or characters that you have known in the past, or is this all a concoction in your imagination?
No, it's very much based on. Um, so the genesis for this story, to go back to Sunflower really quick, the thing that I learned about myself in completing Sunflower and sitting down and being able to write a whole script again for the first time in a decade was that there was a personal thematic connection that I could make with it. So this is a story about a husband who is deeply concerned about losing his wife at the core of the story. And so I was able to attach myself to that in a way that a lot of these stories I'd plotted or come up with, they were fun, but there was not a emotional resonance that also anchored me to the story. So about 9 years ago, my stepfather passed away suddenly. We were estranged. I hadn't seen him in over a year or two. And his passing kind of led to our returning to Virginia and some new phases in our life that are happening right now. And so when I sat down to try to think about what I could write, I thought, well, what if I wrote him a better ending? What if I could tell a story that was the opposite of what had happened? So in this story, the character of Holt at the beginning of the story, his decisions, his addictions have cost him everything, essentially. And he is tremendously weighted down by that guilt. And deep down inside, he yearns for what he lost, but I don't think he thinks he deserves it. And so he's just trying to get by. And I thought, well, if my stepfather was still alive and he had an opportunity to do something right, what would he do? And so that was the emotional connection for me. Now, Holt is not my stepfather or my dad, and my brother and I are not these brothers in this story. But that was for me the anchor to it. I explicitly had to tell my brother. I was like, "Hey, look, just." But I did borrow a lot of, like I mentioned it earlier, a lot of emotional truth. As far as like there are parts of Holt's past and present that are somehow versions of things that they're not one to one, but the emotional truth of that moment is something I'm borrowing from real life. And then there's a bunch of stuff that is not it's not real at all, especially in the second half of the book. But all of that, I will say, is also based on real research, especially with the area of Southwest Virginia and like rural communities. So it all taps into something, but it's not biographical. So I'll say this because I'm sure he'll watch this and he'll appreciate this. There's a pawn shop in the book. It's called Parnell's, and I have a cousin, and I said, hey, if you had a pawn shop, what would it be like? And he sent me a text about this long, and from that text, I created Parnell's Pledge, the pawn shop in the book. And it was nothing.
Is that is he the character then, the D-O-double-G?
He's not necessarily that character. Sorry, Mike. Mad Dog is a lot a gentle and kinder and more naive soul, I think. But definitely just the overall vibe of the pledge comes from him specifically. So there's a few things like that as well where I was just like, hey, what would you do? And all right, well that worked. So let's put it in there and see what happens. Even down to the fact, like there are aspects of the pledge that I was like, I should just take that out. And I did it. I kept it in just to honor his ideas. So.
Well, I do have a couple extra questions. Not extra. I think I'm saving the best for last. But do you want to read an excerpt from your novel?
I can, sure. And I'll do this from the. This will be early on in the book. Sorry, I'm gonna take a swig of water. So this would be, again, going back to what I know best. This would be kind of towards the end of the first act. So just as a mild setup, we find Holt at the beginning of the story. He's isolating, he's alone, but there's part of him that's yearning for a second chance, although he does not think that people like him deserve a second chance. And in the midst of that, a person from his past shows back up, looking for one of the sons that he helped raise, a guy named Coy. And Coy is apparently gone missing, and there's some mystery surrounding that. Holt has been kind of trying to stay out of that whole situation, and he's returning home one evening, and the deputy, Earl Chadwick, is waiting for him at the gate to his property. And so that's how this scene, we're going to kind of enter mid-scene there. Holt dug in his pocket, watching Dandridge's eyes. There was not a glint of curiosity or suspicion in them, and neither of them was a threat to the other, for now at least. Holt took a drag, blew the smoke out, and asked, "What's this that couldn't wait till morning, Earl? Seeing as you're out riding with the boss man tonight, I assume you've got more important matters to attend to than a lonely old redneck." "I'm not aiming to bother you none. It's like I said. We're out this way because there's an itch neither of us can quite reach yet," Dandridge replied. "How it is sometimes, you know. Not quite there yet, but I'm reaching." Holt smoked and thought. He looked toward the dark and silent SUV, big nudge bars fitted to its chassis. He was being observed. "We better see somebody else about that, then. There's nothing out here that's going to scratch it for you." Dandridge kicked at the road, knocking loose a piece of rock. Holt watched him stoop and grab the stone, and the big deputy slung it hard but playfully at one of the no trespassing signs stapled to the trunks of the big trees that had been there longer than either man's family had lived in these parts. It made a solid thumping sound as it ricocheted off into the woods. "That never gets old," the deputy said with a smile. "We're just looking in all the places, you know. Here's the thing, what I came to say. Some developments may involve Coy. Developments that don't need you or anyone else stirring anything up while we're at work, seeing where all this goes. You got a good thing going out here, don't you?" Holt looked at him, hearing and seeing and knowing. "It's quiet." Earl Dandridge nodded. "Let's keep it that way." "Tell me something I don't know, deputy, or tell me good night." "Let's not see each other anytime soon, Holt." Dandridge walked to the passenger side of the SUV. The interior light popped on briefly as the door opened and shut, and in that window the weakening illumination revealed a man with a Stratton hat perched atop his head sitting behind the wheel. Sheriff Frank Bowers. Holt remembered seeing something about the man's 70th birthday a while back, maybe a year ago. He'd been sheriff for about as long as anyone could remember. Maybe one day there might be a statue of him downtown outside the sheriff's department. The two officers of the law exchanged words, their shapes and shadows behind dark glass, and then Holt was nearly blinded again as the vehicle's powerful engine and bright running lights sparked to life. He shielded his eyes with his hand, peering between his fingers as the truck backed into the road. Then its wheels kicked up a little gravel, and they were off to wherever. Holt stood in the dark with the stars overhead. As he drove slowly up the dirt road toward home, straddling the deep rut carved by late-season rainwater, he could still see the stars sprinkled up there, occasionally blocked out by a pine bough or a limb that sprang out over the driveway. It reminded him of the first time he kissed her. The storm had sprung up on them fast and furious. It swept in sideways, wind and rain and peals of thunder. They had driven to the county fair to eat popcorn and watch the 4th of July fireworks. Soon the only fireworks were the jagged purple bolts of lightning scarring the blackness that enveloped them. They piled into Shelby's car, Holt in the driver's seat and her scooting the boys in behind them. Holt and Shelby had been stealing time together at work whenever they could get over that first month of what might. Holt and Shelby had been stealing time together at work whenever they could that first month of what some might call courtship. The boys were never too far away, consummate supervisors, bailiffs. That night in the rain, Holt remembered gripping the wheel as he navigated them back to the duplex Shelby rented with her tip money. The '87 LeBaron convertible Shelby fought hard to keep running back then, had lost a headlamp to a long night and a sharp turn the weekend before. The storm surrounded and swallowed them as he got them all home safely with one headlight and her hand on his knee. He kissed Shelby under the shallow roof that overhung the concrete steps of the stoop she and the boy shared with their neighboring apartment. Years later, Casey confided in Holt that he'd seen them through the peephole. He said to Holt, the two of them lounging on the couch together, he said, "She looked happy, and that was enough for me." Even later, standing in the same living room in the tiny house on Stones Mill Road, memories packed up and walls bare, grief-stricken and broken, Casey would want to kill him. He'd come close to trying. Holt could recall their faces when Coy had yanked them apart. Casey had been all fumes, hot and ready to explode. Coy had just looked sad and embarrassed.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And, going back to your descriptions and characterizations, I love how everything that you have written in there gives to me, it forwards the perspective that we have of the character. Like the things that Holt notices, like the push bars on the front of the car, or that he's being watched, or like the fact that the deputy sheriff picked up a rock and threw it against the tree, like all that stuff, it comes to build the world. It's not just talking heads. You've got all these characters that have lived there and known each other their whole lives, and we're just being able to see that. So I think you did a great job on all that.
Well, thank you.
So my final question then. The last time that you were on here, we discussed your story that you briefly alluded to with the moon coming down, and that one we had discovered that it was a coming of age story, kind of. This is not a coming of age story. So Holt is old. He already knows who he is. He's a rough guy, and you've already kind of alluded to this as well a few times. But this is like a character arc of redemption. And in fact, I think your book trailer it mentions this as well. When you had some of the text, it said the lengths that people will go to for a second chance. So what messages are you trying to give around perhaps family and mistakes of the past and an old man trying to redeem himself?
Yeah, that's great. And that really is what this book is about. It's a book about fathers and sons, for lack of a better, fathers and kids. So there's, even now, like as I'm, in 3 weeks, 3 weeks from when we're recording this, when the book comes out, is the week that I turn 40. And so reflecting on being a dad and getting older, I think the real lesson at the core of it is forgiveness, and forgiving those parts of ourselves that we're ashamed of, even if they don't go away. Like making friends with the parts of ourselves that we don't like. In some cases, because they're the parts that we might need to survive, or the parts that we've adapted in ourselves to survive in the circumstances that we are. So we can't hold ourselves to blame sometime for the mistakes that we made because we are surviving. I grew up in a place where at certain times I felt there was a potential for violence at any moment, and that bleeds into this story. And so forgiving ourselves, forgiving those who've offended us and or have broken our hearts when appropriate. But also, one of the key things that I'd love people to pay attention to is when it comes to violence, because the book does have some violence, especially in the second half. It was my goal that Holt would never be cruel. That violence on his behalf would never be out of meanness. And that's something that he struggles with. Do you retaliate? How much of yourself do you give away so that you can go hurt somebody that's hurt you? And so that would be the other big theme that I just struggled with as I was writing it, was in a world that is violent, that sometimes requires you to defend yourself. How do you do so in a way, and how do you protect people in a way that might require something of you that you don't even like, that you find ugly, without being cruel about it, and without being cruel to other people, and always trying to have their humanity in the foreground of your mind as you're approaching it. And then also, hopefully, the reader will genuinely want some people to just not, hopefully I want them to feel like, oh, well, these people don't deserve this kindness, and then have to wrestle with that inside themselves. So it's like, well, if I wanted him to do this, or if I wanted this person to do this, what does that say about me? And so those are the big things that I was thinking about as I was writing this book.
Awesome. Well, I can recommend this book if you like excellent descriptions and excellent characterization and a smattering of WWE.
Oh, just a little bit. Yeah, just for sure.
You said it comes out next month. Any other comments?
No, November 12th on ebook and paperback, wherever you can get books online. Please, I'd rather have a couple of kind words than your money. So please leave a review if you like it. Let me know what you think.
All right. Zac, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate the conversation. Everybody, we had Zac Cannon.